Good morning, everybody. We are finally starting our new book, The Princess and the Goblin. I am so excited to read this, and I hope you are too. Black Beauty is a wonderful story with a lot of great moral lessons and helps us develop some sympathy for animals and for people. But The Princess and the Goblin is a really fun change of pace. It is a fantasy story that has some very magical elements to it, including, as you might be able to tell, some goblins as part of the story. And you'll hear what these goblins are like living in these subterranean or underground caverns. So there's a lot of wonderful themes to this story as well. The princess in this story, from the title, she is a wonderful person who is actually a princess, but also is a princess at heart, which you'll see throughout the story. So let's begin chapter 1 of The Princess and the Goblin. If you have your own copy of the book, which I know several of you already do, you can take it out, and you'll see that at the very beginning of it, there is a little introduction that we won't be reading together, but you are welcome to read it on your own, kind of giving some background about why this is a significant book somewhat, and just why people really like this author, George MacDonald. It says at one point that he, the author of this book, is stern and clear about what nobility is, which is being noble or like a king or queen. It has nothing to do with money or social status. A princess is a girl who behaves nobly. So it's not about actually having a father who's a king, even though the princess in the story does have that. She behaves like a noble person. Now, Curdy is a character that we'll see later on. He is brave, kind, and he behaves nobly and wisely, even though he is not royalty. So we'll see more of that throughout the book. And in contrast, the goblins, which are very opposite of that description of Curdy and of Irene, the princess we'll see in the story. Okay, now chapter 1 of this story is just called Why the Princess Has a Story About Her. There's a lot of really funny titles, so I'll make sure that we read the titles every time. So, Why the Princess Has a Story About Her. Chapter 1. There was once a little princess whose father was king over a great country full of mountains and valleys. His palace was built upon one of the mountains and was very grand and beautiful. The princess, whose name was Irene, was born there, but she was sent soon after her birth because her mother was not very strong, to be brought up by country people in a large house, half castle, half farmhouse. You can see the hills they live in on the side of another mountain, about halfway between its base and its peak. Now, the princess was a sweet little creature, and at the time my story begins, she was about 8 years old. How many of you are 8 years old? Quite a few. Or maybe some of you just turned 9. I think, but she got older very fast, the author continues. Her face was very fair and pretty, with eyes like 2 bits of night sky, each with a star dissolved in the blue. Those eyes you would have thought must have known they came from there. I think her eyes are looking up at the heavens, almost like she knows that that's a special place. So often were they turned up in that direction. The ceiling of her nursery, and usually you hear of the word nursery for babies. She's a young girl and it just is her bedroom. The ceiling of her nursery was blue, with stars in it, as like the sky as they could make it. But I doubt if ever she saw the real sky with the stars in it, for a reason which I had better mention at once. What's the mystery? She has never seen the real sky. She's a princess, the lovely room. She's never seen the sky. Now, these mountains were full of hollow places underneath, huge caverns and winding ways, some with water running through them, and some shining with all colors of the rainbow when a light was taken in. There would not have been much known about them had there not been mines there, great deep pits with long galleries and passages running off from them, which had been dug to get out the ore of which the mountains were full. In the course of digging, the miners came upon many of these natural caverns. A few of them had far-off openings out on the side of a mountain or into a ravine. So these miners are digging into a mountain, and they're seeing a cavern, which is a huge open cave. So they've just come across these. Now, in these subterranean caverns, subterranean comes from two Latin words. Sub means under, and terra means earth. So they're in these subterranean caverns. There lived a strange race of beings there, called by some people gnomes, which I'm sure many of you know of. Some call them kobolds, which is probably not a word that you've heard of to describe them. But by some others still, they were called goblins. Now, there was a legend current in the country that at one time, these goblins used to live above ground. And they were actually very similar to other people. But for some reason or other, concerning which there were very different legendary theories, the king had laid that they thought what they thought were too severe taxes upon them. Severe, spelling word. Or had required observances of them they did not like. Or had begun to treat them with more severity in some way or other and impose stricter laws. And the consequence was that they had all disappeared from the face of the country. So basically, they used to look like normal people, but this is what they look like now. And they're starting to live in these underground caverns because they thought the king taxed them too highly. Now, all working grown-ups need to pay taxes. That's part of life. It seems, and we'll see later in the book, and you'll be able to tell more. It sure seems like they actually didn't have unfair taxes. They just didn't want to have any taxes. They didn't want to pay anything to the king, no responsibilities. So they didn't like to do that. They just ran away, found a home in these underground caverns, and they're getting uglier and uglier. Look at how weird. The giant head, little bitty body, and the beard touching the ground. This guy's beard is split off in two. Very bizarre creatures. Now, according to legend, and legend means it is not history, it's just a story that's been around for a long time. Instead of going to some other country, they all had taken refuge in the subterranean caverns, whence they never came out but at night. And even then, seldom showed themselves in any numbers, meaning not very often did they show themselves, and never to many people at once. It was only in the least frequented and most difficult parts of the mountains that they were said to gather even at night in the open air. Those who had caught sight of any of them said that they had greatly altered in the course of generations. And no wonder, seeing they lived away from the sun in cold and wet, dark places. They were now not ordinarily ugly, but either absolutely hideous or ludicrously grotesque. Grotesque means distorted and weird and ugly, both in face and form. There was no invention, they said, of the most lawless imagination expressed by pen or pencil that could surpass the extravagance of their appearance. Don't even dare try to draw one of these. You cannot capture these goblins. The goblins themselves, but I suspect those who said so had mistaken some of their animal companions for the goblins themselves, of which more by and by. We'll find out about the goblin animals soon. Now, the goblins themselves were not so far removed from the human as such a description would imply. So now the author is saying, that's the animals that are especially weird, but maybe you could draw the goblin. Now, and as they grew misshapen in body, they had grown in knowledge and cleverness. Now, a lot of times those are good qualities, but these goblins are using their knowledge and cleverness for evil. And now we're able to do things no mortal could see the possibility of. But as they grew in cunning, they grew in mischief, and their great delight was in every way they could think of to annoy the people who lived in the open air story above them. Well, it sounds pretty minor, to annoy, but they're bad. Just trust me. They have cunning, and they are deceptive and tricky, and they're trying to annoy in really evil ways. Now, they had enough affection left for each other, so the goblins would take care of each other, to preserve them from being absolutely cruel for cruelty's sake to those that came in their way. But still, they so heartily cherished the ancestral grudge against those who occupied their former possessions, and especially against the descendants of the king who had caused their expulsion. So they're still bitter at anybody above ground, but especially descendants of the king. So who do you think that includes? Maybe the princess. They have a grudge against the king. They're holding on to this bitterness and anger, even though it was generations ago and he was not really responsible. That they sought every opportunity of tormenting them in ways that were as odd as their inventors. And although they were dwarfed and misshapen, they had strength equal to their cunning. So they're tiny but strong. In the process of time, they had got a king and a government of their own, whose chief business, beyond their own simple affairs, was to devise trouble for their neighbors. It will now be pretty evident why the little princess had never seen the sky at night. Why is that? Why has she not seen the sky at night? She has to be protected from the goblins. The goblins come out at night. They were much too afraid of the goblins to let her out of the house then, even in company with ever so many attendants. And they had good reason, as we shall see by and by. Okay, that is the end of chapter 1. What do you think? Well, it's going to get weirder and weirder. Just you wait. But that is all of our reading for today. I am going to be posting notes to go along with the book, just like with Black Beauty. You do not have to take the notes, but it's kind of a good resource so that you can look back at them, and you are welcome to write the notes if you would like. But that is all for our reading today. I will talk to you all later, and I hope that you enjoy this book. You can still order it if you'd like to have your own to follow along. I think that I probably will do it like Black Beauty, where I present it next time and you can just follow along with the writing. But I couldn't find a version with pictures, so but let me know which one you prefer. But I think I'll go back to the way I did it with Black Beauty for the next video. Okay, I'll talk to you all later. Have a wonderful day. Bye.